general. Also, I am one of the I was one of the colleagues here in the Hong Kong Design Institute. So in multi levels, I wish today we have interesting sharing tonight. Sorry that some cold. Not completely. Whenever we talk about collaborations, I would say collaborations among different institutes or among different countries. At least there are 3 levels of collaboration that we can talk about. One is the really kind of light touch. We can say that it's like kind of if we talk about a relationship between a boys and a girl, it's like they start to seeing each other, or you're playing the act. Okay, you start to introduce each other to each other. So we will call that like an app kind of relationship. Then if we talk about the institute relationship, then we talk about like visits or crits, or like visiting another organizations, or like attending a certain kind of events. So it's really kind of an introductory relationship. The second level that we may call that a dating, that you start a relationship. Then in the institute level, then it could be a project. It could be a parallel studio. It could be an exhibition. It could be a exchange program that 2 institutions or 2 organizations start to build up something together. But it's project based. Okay, so just like dating. Okay, you may see one movie or see one concert that if you don't like that girl or don't like that boy, that you may not see them again. But you still need to contribute in a way. And then a third level of collaboration, of course, will become a marriage. Okay, it's a continuous relationship, and then you need to understand both much more, and you will find much more difficulties. But also that maybe the result could be much more fruitful. So in terms of on the institute level, that would become a joint program, a joint degree, or to deliver like what HKDI has been doing with the University of Lincoln, that you deliver a program for a year long. So at least that we have 3 levels of collaboration that we have talked about. Like when we talk about all different kind of universities or institutions, when we talk about collaboration, we will explore all these opportunities. And I would believe that today the 2 parties, the Hong Kong Design Institute and the University of Lincoln, have done all 3 levels. So I think today we have quite a multifaceted or multi-layers that we can explore. How many interesting points or difficulties that we can talk about. And like what I said, actually, the HKDI has been working with the University of Lincoln for a joint degree from the start of it until today is almost 9 years. And this mode of delivery of a degree, like overseas, sometimes remote, sometimes on-site, this kind of joint delivery of degree, I can say that is the examples of this, or the successful example of this, I think is rare around the globe. It's not common. First, it's difficult, but it's also interesting because you basically put 2 systems or 2 character together to bring out the best of both. So I would say that this experience would be valuable for sharing or for learning, not only for Hong Kong or for UK or even for around the globe, for the education system to take a reference. And so today, based on this background, actually we have three speakers. The first speaker would be Eddie Chen. Eddie Chen is actually the lecturer from the HKDI, and he is also the program coordinator for the top of degree with University of Lincoln for the degree called BA on architecture. And so he probably could share the pros and cons or the different perspectives for the marriage. And then Mr. Henry Chen is a lecturer from HKDI that is also the program leader for the High Diploma of Architectural Design. He is going to share maybe a lighter collaboration that with another institutions at the University of Ravensbourne, London, that is actually a joint studio that are talking on kind of a same theme, but basically like parallel cities, talk about London and Hong Kong, to investigate some urban scenarios. And then there are different levels of also collaboration, like joint studios, joint trees, and exhibitions and things. So Henry probably can share some interesting points about that. And last but not least, we have there's Jill Chow, that she probably will share the perspectives from the UK side, from the University of Lincoln side, that how all this kind of collaboration works along, and how does it work from the Lincoln point of view, especially from the student as the producers point of view. So without further ado, maybe I can introduce Eddie, Mr. Chen first, to share with us on the very interesting portfolio about the island peripheries. So Eddie, please. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Eddie Chen, and as Jason introduced, I'm the program coordinator of the top of degree program here. I also teach the high diploma in architectural design at the Hong Kong Design Institute. So for today, I will mainly focus on the top of degree work. The theme of our symposium is explore creative responses to the challenge of urban development. And to start, I want to show some sort of reference. Sorry. So, talking about challenges, I think this is a famous kind of architectural work by Le Corbusier in the 1920s, thinking about a very revolutionary response to tackle the post-war challenges on city rebuilding and population increase, things like that. And the rise of these towers or housing estates, as we still experience in Hong Kong and many other cities, really changed the world, even almost 100 years after the fact. That is a revolutionary response. And on the other hand, we have other creative responses to modernism. And this famous work by Heath Robinson shows or teaches us how to live in a flat very creatively, with these illustrations of how people actually reinvent their living style in these apartments, in these towers. Very light touch, happy images of urban scenarios of how people establish their relationships or their life. Many of us in Hong Kong looking at these images would be laughing and feeling a bit bitter because it's actually becoming very real in our situations. We have couples not being able to live together, even though they're married. And the image on the right showing a family crowded with the piano, with the mom, the baby, and the man all trying to do their own thing in a very crowded space. These are, in 80, 90 years ago, very kind of interesting imagination becoming real now. And not long ago, well, half a century ago from Buckminster Fuller up till now, they start thinking about new challenges that we have in the 21st century. So from half a century ago to what recently, this is a book that's quite interesting, How to Thrive in the Next Economy. Some of the topics, all the topics here that are extremely important, and currently we all think about these issues about food, about water, about common sharing stuff, and so on and so forth. And today, I would use some of our students' work to demonstrate how students think about these works. And as I highlighted, there are a few points here that are relevant to the student projects. We didn't let the students, by showing them this book, to think about these strategic points. These are more kind of coincidence, as you would say. When we put students into this kind of urban situation, immediately they would come up with things that are sort of showing the need or the questions that we need to think about in the future. For today, I will focus on the work that we did in the last year, so from 2020 to 2021. And as globally, we were deeply affected by the pandemic, the way that we were locked down, the way that we were working and studying or learning from home. It's really forcing us to rethink a lot of our daily routine, a lot of our relationships to the city, relationship to our friends, our family. So this is a very simple and direct brief that we set to students to ask them to think about or to reflect on their experience in the past year, since 2019, 2020, and so on, to try to identify issues about our cities and try to come up with innovative solutions. And unlike our previous practice, we usually sort of identify from more of a top-down kind of implementation. So the tutor will identify a site, and our students go and research and look at the problems there. This time we reverse the logic. So we ask the students to tell us about their own districts, the districts that they live in. So as you see on the map, this map of Hong Kong, and the red dots are the places that the students live in. And these are also the places that they anchor their project for the year. So as tutors, we ask the students to tell us what is the special things, or what are the findings from the district they live in, what are the positive things, what are the sort of maybe negative kind of issues that are affected by the pandemic and other issues. And we come with quite a lot of interesting topics that are very realistic and very relevant, either to Hong Kong as a city, to the situation that we're in. And some of those are also kind of global issues that facing in many major cities. So, for example, is the aging population. Of course, globally, we're facing this big problem. And during the pandemic, the problem with the aging population is also amplified because of, especially in Hong Kong, we have a lot of elderlies. They rely on gathering in the public space as a daily routine for their social lives. And because of the lockdown, because of the social distancing, they have to be separated. They have to sort of be stuck at home, and there are a lot of negative reflects on the situation. So, and affecting other age groups is the youth. Normally, they are the most cheerful group of people, or age groups. But also, such as the pandemic, it also affects their experience, their learning opportunities. When they're locked down, they cannot go to school. They would be sharing rooms, and in their apartment, they have to attend classes. While also, maybe the parents are also at home, the grandparents are also at home. And in Hong Kong, especially, there are not enough this kind of shared or library space or study space, and that causes a lot of anxieties to different students of primary school, secondary school, to university students. To even the younger age, to our kids, the children. This is partially related to the pandemic, partially really affecting all the high density cities. The need of childcare services and family supports. Hong Kong has a long history of both parents needing to work, and whether parents were working or during the pandemic they were unable to work would cause issues with either financial burden or really how to take care of the kids, how to take care of the children. And if we add all these problems together, from the elderly to our children, then it's really a multi-generational family issues. One of our students, she has a more kind of personal experience on this matter, having to take care of her grandparents who needs a lot of care with universal design, and also that she needs to take care of her own study and so on and so forth. So multi-generational families and universal design, these are also affecting immediate issues on cities. From multi-generation family, we also have multi-ethnic neighborhoods. Hong Kong, multi-faith situation. How do we live in a harmonious community? Everyone respect each other and their religions and practice. This is also an important matter. Affected by the pandemic, that's the unemployment issue. As one of the research shows, this is one of the third most impactful situation in Hong Kong, from the financial crisis to SARS, and then obviously the pandemic. And from unemployment to mental health of those who lost their jobs, and at the same time we need to support the families. This is a very difficult time. And this is again global issues with population and waste treatment, all the takeaway boxes, all the masks, all the extra kind of preparation or protection that we need to just go on our daily lives. That causes a huge burden on the planet, really. How architecture or how spatial design can help with those issues is also something that students are trying to tackle. Food safety, also another issue relating to local economy, how food support the local families, local districts, and how people start to value sort of local food is also something that was quite relevant. So with a lot of these different urban issues that the students identified, not that they always they are able to provide full solutions to that, but I think this is a starting point for them to think about the possible solutions, right? How are those matters relating to architecture, relating to spatial design? And with all these issues identified, they also need to think about an urban strategy, how to relate those to their districts. Right? So there are a few projects that I'm going to show that are thinking about urban spaces like neglected spaces or adaptive reuse or urban infill and urban regeneration. So one of the students, Kemi, so he's looking at the elderly aging population issues in one of the oldest district in Hong Kong, Hong. He started with really studying, analyzing the available public space in the city, also the amenities, the provision of gathering space, and how the COVID on the pandemic has an impact on how people gather around this space, how people use the space. And further on, he started with very small pieces of leftover space in the city, trying to understand if that could be a potential to provide extra areas to these kind of gathering space or extension of the park. From a very small piece, as you see like here at the top left corner, the students start to question a little bit more, start to understand a little bit more of all these possible kind of negatives or neglected space that can be used. And gradually he developed into a more urban strategy, really, to rethink how buildings could be also kept, maybe as an adaptive reuse, and public space can be regained together with the various some kind of hidden leftover space at the beginning. And collectively it becomes more of like an urban regeneration master plan that was trying to keep some of the existing buildings in the areas and also opening up more public space and greenery spaces for the elderly in the area. The second project showing here is it's called the Honest Pavilion. It's by Jimmy. And Jimmy, he was looking at more of the unemployment issues or the mental health issues that was impacted by the COVID. So he also looked at quite an interesting area that currently is quite a hot topic in Hong Kong, or this hidden reservoir excavated underneath the top of these mountain areas. Really kind of, if you're on the street level, you cannot see anything. You see only sort of like this kind of cut out landscape. And on top, there are these interesting kind of park facilities and with a reservoir underneath this ground, as you can see on top. So for his project, he's looking at how all this public space could be reinvented into a more kind of multiple use, not just for amenities, for playing or running, jogging. It's also maybe a place for the unemployed or for the people in need of mental therapy. Could have a hiding place for them to seek help. So that was the beginning of the topic, and it then lead on to how he thinks of how nature can help relaxing, de-stressing people, relaxing them, and how that could help as a part of a therapy process. So the therapy doesn't need to be fully kind of enclosed in a hospital-like, clinic-like situation. We can really open up to nature to allow people to relax naturally. So leading on to having a more kind of comprehensive strategy or architectural proposal that blends in the architecture and the landscape together. And that is sort of an overall overview that he has. The last project that I will share is called The Orient by Samson. And again, he looked at the unemployment situation, but this time he tried to relate that to a local industry, or the history of a local industry. That's the pearl farming in one of the inner harbor in Hong Kong. And with some quite extensive research understanding the geographical context of this inner bay that used to have a pearl farm in the area. And he's looking at how, by trying to revive the local industry, would help with the local business and hence help with soothing the unemployment issue. So it's an architectural proposal that blends in local tourism, local industries, and some kind of small retail activities. It really helped to sort of try to envision a new architecture that blends in the landscape to yes, and serving the local districts. And that is the end of my presentation today. And so for this project, we have a joint team from Hong Kong and Lincoln, University of Lincoln in the UK, and with a lot of students. So we work together with, as Jason earlier mentioned, is more like a marriage, and with all these fathers and mothers, we have many children. So it's a very interesting kind of experience. I think the collaboration, having students are being able to expose to both culture and also to both kind of architectural references, cities, and wisdoms is very rewarding. Because of time, I will stop my presentation here, and please visit our full online exhibition with both events, and so that's the QR code and the links that you can access. You can also get more information on the HKDI architectural design with the Instagram page here. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Eddie. I think the sharing of this, I think is quite varied. I would say that different perspectives to look at the, I would say, the issues in Hong Kong, but the way to tackle it is somehow not very conventional. I would say that the way that the Hong Kong people might see it, that might actually be one of the fruitful way of as a collaborative program that the minds come together from the Hong Kong and the UK, and these actually could benefit the horizon of our students, that the way they see things, and to really come up with really creative solutions to very local issues or local problems. So now may I actually introduce Mr. Chen, Henry, to share with us again another I would say not so much of problems or issues, but in a bigger scale, in a more like an urban scale issues that is both relate to Hong Kong and UK, especially London.
I need some time to set up the screen sharing. So hope everyone can see the screen. So the second part about this kind of collaboration between UK and Hong Kong, or referring back to what Jason was saying about these kinds of relationships. So this is definitely not, I would say that this is sort of early marriage, potentially late relationship. It's a bit messy, but we definitely went through the setup of this relationship in whether it was traditional, I would say, because when we started this collaboration with the Ravensbourne University of London, we set forth the brief and the collaboration to be just like any traditional design studio. So we would have both schools explore similar urban topics, but then all of a sudden came the pandemic. And essentially everything was completely new, the format was new. So it was almost like a blind date, you get set up and then you don't really know what you're getting into, and then somehow it kind of worked out, but then, so whether it worked out or not, I'll show you some examples of the projects, but the studio brief was titled Urban Futures, People, Communication, and Architecture. Besides Ravensbourne University of London, with the architecture program, we actually had two programs from Hong Kong, from the HKDI sharing this kind of platform, this opportunity. They came from the visual communications background, along with our architecture program. So it was a really interesting way to have our students collaborate, not just between the two schools, two different cultural backgrounds, but to really look at our built environment or our cities or our urban landscape, or whatever you want to define it, our world to be, to look at it from different perspectives. So I'll go through some project examples on the background of what students were investigating, and then we kind of maybe hopefully can talk about these if anybody has any questions. So from the beginning, we wanted students to look at the two different cities, Hong Kong and London, but maybe it was too ambitious, especially being a studio project for year 2 architecture students or communication students. So we wanted to sort of hone in specific districts. So unfortunately, the professor from Ravensbourne is not available for Symposium today, but otherwise, Paulo, when we were discussing the setup for this project, we wanted to share or have a similar sort of historical context to let the students build their projects off of. So with gentrification and urban renewal and sort of sprawling in European cities, and also this kind of hyper density in Hong Kong, how do we deal with aging districts? What do we do? Like we always talk about sustainability and how to ensure that what we as architects or urban planners build, how do we build something that could last and not be so harmful to the environment? So not purely from an environmental point of view, but also from a city sustainability, or how it could continue to perpetuate itself. So we picked two sort of similar districts, one being Samsui in Hong Kong, which is this, people from Hong Kong are very familiar with. So this industrial neighborhood with a lot of urban sort of residential intervention in the 60s. And then the counter side to this would be Hackney Wick in London, which is also this shipbuilding industrial district, but it has been sort of abandoned and left over for maybe a couple of decades. And recently, there's been a lot of new developments, new residential, commercial developments that has intervened. So looking at these two cities, we wanted students to really have a perspective on the impact of what they were looking at, what is there at first, what is existing, how to make people be aware of what is visually and spatially surrounding them. So the investigation sort of started, a little bit more background about the two districts. So Samsui is quite small, but much bigger in comparison to Hackney Wick. If you look at the numbers, though, the population, it's much bigger, being over 40,000 population. This was, I think, surveyed in 2018. So in comparison, it's a much less dense district to the built environment. We had students look at sort of the visual impact at first, because we did have communication students. So they were really interested in sort of the visual characters. And we talked about topographies and typologies. So different types of buildings with different types of graphics, different types of arts, different types of words that could inspire and interest people to visit. Because I think this day and age, with social media and the internet, people are sort of really drawn to these kinds of moments where they can, take a photo and then highlight their sort of their travels and whatnot. So some students from the UK were looking at these aging buildings, but then how the streets are actually occupied at a very small scale, at the very human scale. One thing I forgot to mention was the brief. We wanted students to look at a sort of, they pick a route that they can walk through Hackney Wick or Samsui. So about 350 meters long. And within that, they can essentially, be free as they need to, and just kind of look at whatever they want to look at, whether it's something that is of local culture, graffiti, arts, culture, commercial. There wasn't any sort of boundary, but to let them open their eyes to look at the places that we live in. We may come across it all the time, but not really realize some of the insights or some of the unique characters of these districts. So, you can see, in Hackney Wick, these two images, or this one image, it was quite worn down. It was not occupied, it was idle for quite some time. And essentially artists would take over. And Samsui would have something similar, but then I don't think with the density that Hong Kong has, there isn't really a downtime. Even though some buildings are not occupied, there's always people, and it's always flooded with different sorts of activities. And I think that's what makes this kind of comparison, or this kind of contrast between the two districts, really interesting. Hackney Wick did have a lot of buildings that were completely abandoned for decades, like I said, until recent times. But Samsui, even with what Eddie mentioned earlier about the sort of social economic crisis that Hong Kong has suffered, you still see a lot of street activity. So these images that you see are of the sort of flea markets, or the street markets that was happening during
the pandemic, especially at the very beginning when the reported cases of COVID were quite high. So people were still out on the streets and they were selling things. So this kind of informal trade and use of these informal spaces were really interesting. And I think a lot of students were drawn to how to incorporate these kinds of local behaviors into their design, their architectural proposals or their visual ideas. And the visual communication students, they actually took time into drawing these out, these scenarios, try to really understand, not just from a sort of superficial perspective of looking at, oh, people are selling things on the street, but to try to understand the demographics and record it through their own sort of representational methods. So you can see, like the elders being engaged in the community, hawkers selling things on the streets while, carrying or wearing masks during the pandemic. These activities, and also, like it's a bit morbid. You see on the lower right, that image has this this devil or this I don't know, someone who's coming to take lives away from the pandemic. So this kind of image of this vibrancy that happens not because of people not being scared of the pandemic, but it's due to the proximity of people and the density. Simply in Hong Kong, you can't avoid being really close to people. You can't really escape, right? We're bounded. So essentially this kind of character or characteristics of some sort of, or this environment is really sort of studied and illustrated here. More examples of these illustrations, and students were, trying to depict what they were trying to do when they were recording and visually trying to understand the city better through their analysis. And some even looked as small as, these little stickers for advertisements and ads that are sort of layered and really texturalized to kind of understand, the history and also how the streets or the different materials or the different streetscapes are being used. Once again, kind of going back to this really informal way of communication. And then from then on, I think some architecture students were also looking at buildings themselves, visual impacts of these buildings. This was an architecture student who got quite interested in the different types of colors that are just visible, because in Hong Kong, if you've been here, or the locals, if you open up your eyes, you'll see that, whether they be public housing buildings or be private tenement houses, whatnot, they're always covered in these really vibrant, ill-coordinated, if I could say so myself, ill-coordinated colors. So she was really interested in sort of this evolution of colors and whether these, layering of paints throughout time would have an impact on our cityscape. So very preliminary ideas, I think, just so far, all these were trying to just describe the city the way it is. And then this student was trying to really understand why there were so many people on the streets despite the pandemic. And then there were a lot of these kinds of parasitic elements that would happen, people tying their bikes, tying their advertising boards, their hawkers, they would be locking them to, handrails and guardrails and occupying streets where they shouldn't be according to regulations. But yet there's this strong community, this sense of community that has risen from this kind of informal culture, with also, different various cultural groups with different cultural backgrounds, the domestic helpers occupying the streets at different times of the week. So it creates this really dynamic nature. And I think these kinds of discoveries are quite helpful for our students to not just look at buildings, because oftentimes it's very easy for architecture students, especially younger architectural designers, to just look at buildings as forms and to not really understand the context of what they're building within. And I think these exercises that they went through, whether they learned from Hackney Wick or from, from Symposium or vice versa, they were able to really dissect and get sort of more in depth into how to look at these social conditions or urban conditions. So you can see, the density of this student's proposal in Hong Kong from the HKDI student. Essentially, the building was occupying existing buildings. There was basically no room in Sumserville for students to propose anything that would be standalone. As much as they wanted to occupy more buildings. So this kind of parasitic intervention, something that would leach onto something that exists, was a common theme, but it was not something that was imposed onto them. It was through their own discovery. And I want to take this time to sort of jump to a proposal by a UK student from Reservoir. This is a project called the Chamber of Seeds. A completely different approach looking at Hackney Wick because of the density. And we could easily sort of look at how the UK students were looking at gentrification, looking at proposing something that would intervene this district, this aging district. But the proposals were, I would say, more whimsical. I don't know if it's because there was more room, there was more space. And at the same time, I think there was more of a sort of conscious awareness of the environment. So the student actually proposed to have this kind of seed bank. And so there was a lot of survey that was done to, or that was conducted with the local businesses and some of the people who live there, the neighbors. And she also looked at the various kinds of seeds of weeds and whatever sort of indigenous plants that are found in Hackney Wick, and then essentially propose this kind of seed bank where the locals can come in and drop off the seeds, and then they can create this library of this redefined history, if you would, and then the sort of the plant or the man-made nature or this kind of controlled nature would be balancing the industrial parts or the aging parts of the city. So it's not so much about the architectural idea, I think, not about this proposal of how the building looks like, but the idea, this kind of catalyst for a building that could promote something that could trigger new ideas of how the community could sustain, and by bringing in something different. And this is an artist sort of studio that another UK student proposed. It's a cube for pottery making. So much less of an environmentally sensible proposal. But at the same time, you can kind of see this kind of free thinking thought process behind the proposal, thinking about how to really take on this idea formally on bringing these kilns and really looking at maybe some of the local artists that have picked up Hackney Wick while it was not being occupied since the 80s or since the 2000s, and to really reinvent this kind of sense of community for artists. So I thought that was quite interesting, because a lot of the Hong Kong students for their Sumserville project, they also saw a new breed of artists who had taken over Sumserville, and how to then create this kind of new community that could sustain this an interesting sort of comparison between the two cities. I just wanted to show this as an example, because the last project that I show is also an artist village, but you can see this proposal done by the student. Basically, everything's kind of elevated. And it's always this really interesting discussion between Asian cities and sort of Western cities, because the way how we deal with density is completely different. We always try to mitigate density, while I think in a lot of Western cities, they try to densify it. And in Hong Kong in particular, I remember when I was in architecture school, there was this discussion, about mixed use being really crucial in the future of architecture and city planning. But in Hong Kong, growing up in Hong Kong, mixed use has always been around us. The building is it's never really built, even in traditional local architecture here. It's, you get shops and residential in a very small unit packed together since, maybe the early late 1800s even. So this kind of need and desire to raise the ground plane and to sort of elevate things was quite interesting. It was almost like it was by choice or due to formal reasons, or I'm not sure if it's due to a really strong sort of cultural intention or contextually how this related to its context. But if you look at some of the projects in Hong Kong, this last one, the student really wanted to look at the visual impact of how the buildings have these layers because of the different buildings built in different eras and decades and whatnot. And you can kind of see how immediately, without a choice, that all the buildings have to be lifted off the ground. And some of the functions, if you want them to be functional or to have a more open plane for these functions to survive or to be even minimally functional, then we would have to go underground, be maybe potentially subterranean. So this kind of design by choice, or this kind of urban strategy, how do we determine what is appropriate? How do we lift things off with this density that we have in Hong Kong or with Asian cities? Can we strive to have these kinds of proposals be so whimsical or free thinking, or can we have this kind of balance? Can we bring that into Hong Kong? I think it's an interesting and quite, I guess, pressing issue. I think there hasn't been a lot of innovation in the way how Hong Kong has designed the buildings, whether it be the materials or the construction methods. So are there potential methods that we can reinvent and innovate? So I think that's all I have.
Thanks, Henry. It's actually a very different approach from how the UK students and Hong Kong students and also the communication students address to the same brief or even the same area, the way that they look at the urban scale or really tiny stickers to the staircase. So now maybe Jill, let us hear what you have from the perspective from the UK side.
Yeah, sure. Let me share my screen. There we go. Thank you very much, Jason, first of all, and Eddie and Harry for inviting me to this event. And I can see there are some of our students, current and past students in the audience. So welcome to all of you as well. So I will be talking about the collaboration from Lincoln perspective, and I'll share with you some projects that the Lincoln students, third-year students, did from last year. So first of all, I'd like to just give you a brief overview of Lincoln. Lincoln is a cathedral city. It's a county town of Lincolnshire in England. We have an urban population of about 115,000 people, so quite small, very different from Hong Kong, which has what, 7 million people. So it's a typical medieval town. And the students project here, we have quite different problems, but also I can see that we have the same problems as a mega city in Hong Kong as well, such as sustainability issues, such as social coherence, and the elderly population. So all these problems will be reflected in the students' project, which I'll share with you. So our school, architecture school, is situated in the heart of the city. And we are a growing school. We have about 260 students at the moment, with 14 full-time and part-time staff. So the identity of our school rests on sustainability. And our ambition is to educate students to the highest professional standards and to nurture confident graduates who will make a positive difference in the world. So in our school, we have quite a few different programs, ranging from architecture to construction, science and management, as well as architecture, science and technology. So we have part 1, 2, 3 architecture program, master program, and MPhil PhD program. And it is our intention to integrate those kind of 3 strands of program together. We have shared lectures, shared tutorials, and shared staff to really integrate the 3 parts, integrate architecture with construction. So one of the program, BA Honors Architecture, we run with Hong Kong Design Institute, SHAPE, and the Vocational Training Council. So this program, like Jason said, we built a marriage with this program, and it's a very successful marriage, maybe because we are in 2 separate continents and we don't talk to each other very often. The success to marriage, as joking, but yeah, so we have been in collaboration since 2014, and the BA Honor Architecture Level 3 programs are delivered in both Lincoln campus and HKDI campus. So we have about 165 graduates. That's the stats that I got this morning. And the programs that we deliver in Hong Kong are delivered jointly by HKDI colleagues such as ID himself, and a flying faculty from Lincoln School of Architecture. So we used to, before the pandemic, we used to fly to Hong Kong a few times a year with a few tutors to deliver design and dissertation and technical tutorials and lectures. But unfortunately, because of the pandemic and lockdown, it has posed a huge challenge for us to effectively deliver the program. And we're just constantly exploring new ways to engage the students without actually physically being there. Whenever possible, we organize students visits. So this is the cohort of 1920. And they visited us in Lincoln just before the pandemic and lockdown. I miss them dearly. Look at the happy faces. So they visited us for a week, and we did a joint little project with Lincoln students. We had a joint crit with the staff here as well. And they kind of experienced the studio in Lincoln working inside them. And from this year, we still can't fly. So we can try to organize events that can both involve students in Lincoln and in Hong Kong. And I have to say, because of the pandemic and online teaching, we kind of leveled up in our technical skills. So we were able to loop students in from Hong Kong. As you can see from the picture, that's the welcome week. With head of school Stephen giving a talk where the Hong Kong students in their classrooms from Hong Kong tuning into the talk. We also started a joint workshop, a 3-week workshop with the 3rd-year Lincoln students here. And we start to have peer presentation, peer review. This is another online session with Trevor, who is the senior lecturer here, to give comments to the students' work from Hong Kong. And we also started a professional culture and environment guest talk series. So this is to kind of enrich students' experience and give them a more kind of overview of the disciplines related to architecture and the built environment profession. So the first talk happened yesterday. Is from a Professor Nancy Oldendal from the University of Cape Town in South Africa, and she's a fantastic speaker and a town planner as well. and that because of the online presentation, we're able to include all the Hong Kong students in this as well. So this is the kind of almost a new collaboration we're trying to build, with more dating perhaps in it. So moving on to the student and the design studio here. So in Lincoln, we kind of focus on pedagogy with student as the producer. So this pedagogy emphasizes the role of the student as collaborator in the production of knowledge. The capacity for student as producer is grounded in the human attributes of creativity and desire, so that the students themselves can recognize themselves in a world of their own design. So this kind of pedagogical thinking values individuality and the experimental elements involved in the design process. But eventually, the individuality in design will evolve to achieve the final aim of the design, which is the connectedness of people, communities, environment, and society. So that's the basic kind of design philosophy in the school. So I want to introduce two studios running in the third year here. And the first one is organized by Doina Carter, who is a senior lecturer in Lincoln, and she's also the year leader for third year architecture student here. And she was also involved in teaching, delivering Hong Kong tutorials with Hong Kong students. So last year, she organized the studio, which was also a collaboration between a charity, Jubilee Park Woodhall Spa charity, as the theme of her studio in the third year. So this is a kind of a live project because they have a real client, and the client wanted to propose a sustainable future for Woodhall Spa, a very small town near Lincoln. So this town owed its birth and fortune to the curative powers of the local spring. So it was well connected and prosperous Victorian village with hotels, train station, public attraction, and romantic woods. So it's from now, it's a quite a romantic setting. And the most famous part of the town is a heated outdoor pool, which is open all year round. So you can have a dip there. But this town was started in the mid 19th century when there was a craze for underground mine. So the landowners started to dig for mines, but for coals, but they didn't find any coal. Well, instead, they found the hot spring. That's how the Woodhall Spa came to be as the spa town. But now, because of the population kind of decrease, the town itself is in some kind of declination. And that's why the charity wants to propose some strategies to revive it. The trustees outlined 3 areas which required expertise. First is to help with a coherent strategy for sustainability, including social, economic, and environmental perspective. And second is the refurbishment and possible expansion of existing facilities, such as the park, such as the swimming pool. And they want to do a park survey as well. So all the students' projects are revolved around those 3 themes, but the students were also invited to develop their own definitions and views of the issues encountered as basis for design proposals, strategies, and interventions to ensure that the park's resilient in the future. So here's one of the students' work. Her name is Kanika. So Kanika's work concentrated on unveiling the historical background. So she wants to revive Woodhall Spa to its glory days as the main spa town of the whole Mid Eastland. So she really dug into the history of Woodhall Spa and proposed a project that is inspired by the sequence of spaces and hydrotherapy treatments found in Roman bath. So her proposal was to extend the existing pool facilities with a therapeutic pavilion. Thus, the Jubilee Park would perpetuate the original raison d'etre of the village, reactivating it as a destination known for its curative waters. Another student's work, Dom also looked at the existing facilities, but from very different perspectives. So there was a funny story with this. So when they first started the site visit, Dom missed the school bus. So he had to take a local bus to Woodhall Spa. And on the bus, he realized that it was by far the youngest person on the bus. And Woodhall Spa quite readily is aptly known as the God's waiting room. So the average age of that town is very high. So he was trying to explore the current facility and try to design for accessible features to allow the local population to enjoy the facility as much as younger generations. So he tried to design very kind of intricate elements such as telescopic corridors, very articulated arms, a hydraulic pool floor, or concertina chairs. They are small elements, but together they form a kind of an enabler for those who might have difficulties enjoying the facilities there. So that's the studio from last year in Dorina's studio, and they kind of presented this to the trustee, and they were quite happy with the work, and they presented a prize to the students as well. I think the students got free swimming waters to go to the swimming pool, which is quite nice. Another studio I want to mention, which is also a very grounded, down-to-earth, contextualized studio in the third year. It's a studio led by Trevor Alvin, and also a senior lecturer in architecture. So this project was many years in the making, and I remember Trevor getting stressed about getting this project done. So the studio is called Ground Lab. It's an exciting new creative design studio developed for the Sinsel Bank community by our university. So the Sinsel Bank area in Lincoln, it's a very underprivileged area. It's a very big residential district with low income population and often under-repaired terraced houses. So you often hear stories about that area. So Trevor started in this area and tried to use architecture intervention to revive the whole local area. And what he did was he started a design studio within this area in an actual shaping container. So this design studio acts as a social hub, providing a highly visible focal point for the Sinsel Bank community. So this shipping container was completed or shaped onto the site in early 2019. And from then he started to run his design studio within the shipping container to bring all the students into this shipping container. And then they start a series of design projects that are also based in the local community. So from small scale, such as an urban park, installations, pop-up space and street furniture, to actual buildings of architecture and master plan proposals for the regeneration of the area. Here are some photos for the studios in use. It's not a very big space, cramped with students doing their works. So the studio uses collaborative approach and work with people from a range of disciplines, with scholars from university as well as members of the community. And quite often, the community members and residents would pop into the studio for a crit of the students' design project. You can see from the despair of the students' face that they need to properly redo the project here. So it's a true kind of integration and participatory design with the local community. So what they also do is to use this space as a community hub. So they invite local artists and residents of the area to come in to do some skill building workshop or just have some fun with the family. So here, the picture on the left is a pottery making workshop with a local pottery artist and the local residents and the students. And the one on the right are some school children's it's a part of the Being Human festival that we participated. So the school children were brought here to do some activity inside this shipping container. It was a very fun activity for them. So what the project also started was to look at a live project, an actual project that they can do. And they started with a pocket park in Lincoln. So the site used to be a disused children's playground in Sinsel Bank area. And because of the area, the playground was not very highly used. So they started a student project to kind of redesign the park, provide an opportunity for the local community to connect with nature. And they start to apply for funding for it, and they got the funding for it, and was on the local news. And the picture is one of the students' design proposal. So it was very exciting. The park was on site during the pandemic and has now finished and is open to the public now. So this live project, from design conceptualization, community consultation, and to be on site and then actually built within the community, that was a very great achievement. And I think this is just a very good example to show how student as producer as a design pedagogy in the design studio in here. So that was my presentation. Thank you very much, and follow us on Instagram as well.
Thank you, Jill. Thanks. It's a rich and a lot of good, like what you said, a down-to-earth executed project, no matter the spa one or the container. It's actually very good for the students to really get into the ground, to be grounded projects.
Absolutely, yeah.
So actually, I think now we have a Q&A session, or like a free discussion session. Is it until 8, right? So actually we have like be sharp 30 minutes. Okay, 13 minutes for discussion, questions, or so maybe I would ask first, like, any questions from the audience or from the floor. Either the public or students. If you have any question for Jill, for Eddie, for Henry, just feel free to ask. Maybe it would take you some time to think about the questions, so maybe I would throw questions first. after all our sharings, no matter we are on the islands, the situations, and then or the urban situations, or the like what you presented. Before the pandemic, we have done various of collaborations. Again, like among the NGOs, among the institutions, among like us that overseas collaborations. But during pandemic, we also have done quite a lot of collaborations. I think now we are quite get used to this kind of like distant communications and learning and collaboration. I would say technically it's actually get easier and more convenient for these collaborations that beyond countries, beyond discipline, beyond parties. But how would you see that actually like beyond the technical feasibility? Now I think we have almost 2 years of experience of this kind of remote collaboration, because as actually our topics is a little bit related to the creative connections, across the cultures. Then how do we find in this like last 2 years? How do we find like as a short conclusion, as experience? How do we find this kind of creative connections by like virtual connections? Technically it's feasible, but intellectually or academically, how did you find the experience? Is it actually the same, or what would be the difference?
Is this for?
I can share a little bit. I think the experience as I think in the last 2 years, obviously, yes, we were limited in a way that we cannot travel, cannot, as we used to do, visit a lot of schools, we fly to a lot of different cities to study. Cannot do that, but also it opens up other opportunities. I think from teaching side, that we're actually more accessible to other schools because everyone is doing an online kind of discussion. So we could participate in more kind of global discussion platforms, doing joint trades or online review, that kind of thing. For I think like as Jill showed, also I think between Hong Kong and Lincoln, we also find more ways. I think we become more desperate to offer more experience for students. So with this kind of sharing lectures or the welcome events, even this time is the first time we actually try to have this joint workshop for 3 weeks. So this I think because with the support of the technology, it actually allowed us to try out different mode of interaction. I wouldn't say it would replace how we used to do things. I think it would be great with student travel, students being able to attend physically or visit actual buildings and cities benefits a lot. I think it opens up other possibilities. So in the future, if we can do both, then we have more kind of freedom or select what's best for the teaching.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree with Eddie. So like I said, we all sort of leveled up in technology front, and we started doing things that we didn't imagine before, like have joint lectures, trying to coordinate the timetable to have joint crit. I think that's the silver lining, or the good thing that came out of the pandemic. And like Eddie said, we definitely try to incorporate that into in the future where we can start traveling again. This is not a replacement for an actual physical interaction, I don't think, but it's definitely complementary to that.
Yeah, I think also to sort of add on, obviously, like we always encourage architecture students to travel because they sense the physical space. That's fundamental. But maybe one thing that's missing, I do agree that, you know, the technology has brought us closer and the exchanges are, you know, more accessible. But then I think among institutions, it's easy to establish these kinds of relationships because everyone is sharing, right? We're having these platforms. But kind of related to what Jill was presenting with one of the studios, you know, this kind of participatory design in trying to engage the community, I think that is harder in a certain extent, to a certain extent, because for institutions, for students, for schools to engage with each other, it's easy. But for us to engage the public, it's a bit difficult, possibly because of, you know, the public not having the accessibility to technology, or maybe they just don't know how to connect, especially when you really want to get down to sort of the core of the communities. That gets a bit difficult.
Get a question from the audience that do we know how students feel about the digital mode of learning and collaborations? I think from both sides, from the Hong Kong side or from the UK side, that Jill, do you have any feedback from the student? How do they feel about the digital mode, especially about the collaborations?
Especially about collaborations, I think we still need to collect data and find out. It's still a work in progress. Last year, from Lincoln students, I know that they struggle a lot with online teaching. Also, because they got in lockdown quite late, and it was quite a long period of lockdown that they can't get out. I think for the Hong Kong students, I kind of feel like they're more resilient to what's been happening. And I think the lockdown ended much earlier than here. So even though it wasn't ideal situation for learning and producing work, I think they did much better than Lincoln students, I feel.
Something to share, I think generally, I think the pros and cons with the online teaching or the sort of collaboration. I think from the teaching side, like Joe and I, we always discuss how, especially I think between the two teaching teams, how do we share our comments to the students? How do we synchronize the comments? Unlike in previous times, we could sit together with the students on the table with the drawings or work in front, and everything got very direct. It's an immediate kind of communication. Now, kind of, we need to, of course, split into different kind of slots, time slots. Maybe in the morning, I see them in the afternoon, and you'll see them at other time they need to match. So I think with that also is a for the students, they also need to cope with sometimes the delay of these kind of information. The other thing, of course, is the time. Students need to be extremely, as Jill said, extremely resilient. They need to start school at 9, and they need to finish at 9 or 10 in the evening, right? Yeah.
Another thing, actually, I would like to see, like in the near future, like I think in the last 2 years, like all of us, like what Eddie said, we get used to this online lecture, online seminar, online whatever, right? That is actually now become open source. All knowledge become open source. But if our topic is about creative connections, like how do we connect with each other and in a more creative way, and like across cultures, between Hong Kong and UK, between HKDI and Lincoln, then how do we use this kind of like technology more creative instead of just as a means of Teams or Zoom get together and see each other, but how do we manipulate this kind of seeing each other or not seeing each other, time difference, to create a certain kind of creative journey of academic project that I'm interested to or curious to see is there any way anyone would make use of this kind of thing instead of just as a software. Oh, there's actually another thing from. Oh, okay. Yeah. It's a comment.
Thank you for sharing. One side is about the macro scale of Hong Kong urban issues, while the other side in UK allows a closer look into the micro scale of human networks, community formations. Would there be a possibility to swap studios to look at the topics from a different angle?
Yeah, of course. I think always, I think the way we've been teaching our students is to expose them not to one way or a particular or prescribed way of thinking. So having this kind of multifaceted way of approaching problems is critical. And I think this kind of relates back to the digital learning and teaching too. I don't think there's one solution, one perfect way to teach. And, maybe in a certain class or a certain format of teaching, we can say that online teaching is beneficial because information is accessible, time zone and differences and etc. That's beneficial, but at the same time, you can't really replace the human interaction and how we actually, interact and learn from those experiences. So it's maybe about striking the balance. And likewise, whether we can swap studios, I think would be, if time had allowed, for the Ravensbourne collaboration, if we had more exchange given the time and without the pandemic. I think we wanted to try to let students actually design something in the UK and vice versa. We talked about that, but just I think with this online platform, maybe that's one of the holdbacks. Less flexibility.
Yeah, let's see if we could get into another page of collaboration, kind of online, offline mode as a post-pandemic situation, and we'll see. So I think today is the time that we can call it a day. And then thanks again for Jill, Eddie, and Henry for the very comprehensive presentation and see a lot of interesting ideas. So also for the audience, thank you for staying with us. So please visit the website, the British Council Sparks Festival, and you will, I think, see this video back, and also follow the Instagrams of HKDI and Lincoln. So that's
actually on the Spark website. We actually have quite a bit more information on the projects. There were some interviews conducted specifically for the projects that Eddie had described or talked about, and also with the Reservoir project, we also had some interviews with some local tour guides in some circles. So I think that would be beneficial for the public, for anyone interested. Yeah.
great stuff. Okay, thank you guys.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you. See you next time.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.